American Heretics, the Politics of the Gospel. So we'll be showing the documentary here in a moment, and then followed by that, please stay with us. We'll be doing a Q&A with Reverend Martin. He's in the movie, so you'll get a chance to know him a little bit better. And we'll also get to find out what he thinks about being a heretic. So please enjoy the documentary, and again, stay tuned for the Q&A afterwards. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you later.
Good morning. Welcome to the Good Ship Mayflower. It's a very important day for us. A congregation in covenant with the United Church of Christ, where we believe that no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. Nobody has the absolute truth, and that would be, to put it in sort of old religious language, that would be idolatry. To say you know the truth, you're absolutely certain. And by the way, an interesting thing about people who say they're certain, then you need no faith.
There are no historical errors in the Bible. All that we know confirms the truth.
I would cite you to the Apostle Paul and his clear and wise command in Romans 13 to obey the laws of the government because God has ordained the government for his purposes.
I arrived here 32 years ago and thought to myself, what am I doing in Oklahoma? I came to build a liberal Protestant church in Oklahoma, knowing there wouldn't be one on every street corner, but I made the mistake of using the word liberal. And so a woman on the search committee said to me, I just wish you wouldn't keep using that word. I said, well, liberal means open-minded, tolerant of divergent opinions, and exceedingly generous. That's what it means if you look it up, and I would like this church to be liberal in that sense. And she says, no, I don't like it. I don't want you to use it. I said, well, what word would you prefer that I use? And she said, conservative. That was my introduction to Oklahoma. Oklahoma is arguably the reddest state in the country. So we didn't have a single county, for example, that went for Barack Obama in either election. And all counties went for Trump in the last election. We are Southern Baptist in our political orientation. So that means that there are certain messages that get sent to young people who are gay, for example, or who are Democrats. I'm always joking when I'm out lecturing that in Oklahoma you can be a Democrat or you can be a Christian. but you can't be both. Right? That would be peculiar.
We've entered a time where the power of negative partisanship has sorted us along lines of race and religion. So that if you look at Republicans, they're about 7 in 10 white and Christian. Democrats are only at 3 in 10 white and Christian. And what it means is that the two parties have exploited race and religion, two of the most visceral things you could think of in terms of human experience, and they've locked them into partisan identities.
This gets to be called the Bible Belt largely because the kind of religion that was in the South was created in the Civil War and came out of the support of slavery. It's a kind of religion that's stark in many ways, and it's centered on the Bible. They think the Bible is the essence of religion, which is, if you think about it historically, kind of odd. That means Jesus can't really have anything to do with it because there wasn't any Bible in his day. Most people who drive through a landscape don't really see much. But the more you know, the more you see. The same thing's true in a text. It's kind of flat, it's barren, the colors are subtle, although they can be spectacular. It's a beautiful landscape in its own. And it's kind of primordial in ways. It's also the most damaged landscape in the world. You know, we only have about 5% of prairie left. So it's a very damaged ecosystem. Somewhat like the Bible, which is a highly damaged ecosystem. Oklahoma is viewed by the rest of the country as being distinctive. We're either your future or your past. I'm not sure which. I taught for 26 years at Phillips Theological Seminary, which is in Oklahoma. A lot of students would come here, and they have lived in a culture that has been largely Christian and largely unthinking about its Christianity. They don't really question it. The Bible's a moving target. If people who say, well, you have to have a Bible in order to be Christian, well, you can't have any Christians until the 4th century. Because that's when you get the canon. Canon is a 4th century creation masquerading as a 1st century eyewitness report. The various compositions that are in the New Testament never thought they'd be in a New Testament. They're occasional. Paul's letters are clearly occasional. They're just written to specific people. The Gospels are quite local. The canon takes them out of their historical context by force, and they become kind of self-referential, just kind of referring to each other. So then the text is cut free of its historical context, and you're then free to put it in any context you want to over and over again, which is what happens.
The Christian right has defined Christianity for us, and a God that's very judgmental and vindictive, gets angry, punishes people, is a lawgiver and a judge, hands down these laws, and if you break them, you get punished. If you follow them, you get rewarded. It's a very parental and punitive model of Christianity. I don't see that when I study the New Testament and the early church at all. I see the opposite. There are female apostles. Poor people are brought to the table and fed. You know, communion was especially presented to feed poor people who otherwise wouldn't eat. Why do you not judge for yourself what is right? Jesus said it. He put a lot of emphasis on individual action. The idea that God's going to do everything and that everything has been determined by God, I think is a very harmful idea in religion, and that there's nothing we can do to change anything. And I think one of the things that Protestants were supposed to tell the world is, with their whole Protestant work ethic, you can change things. You can make a difference. But look at what's happening now. We have the largest gap between rich and poor in the history of the United States, and it's getting wider all the time. We have more churches than almost anyone, and yet some of the worst social statistics in the country: teen pregnancy, addiction, domestic abuse.
1 in 4 Oklahoma children face food insecurity. Oklahoma incarcerates more women than any other state in the nation. We have for over 25 years.
We have the highest divorce rate of most cultures. This county, 67%, the buckle of the Bible Belt.
Well, that tells you something is really, really wrong with our whole approach to religion.
Be with us as we determine our next faithful step, and then see us through. We pray in the name of our teacher, Jesus. Amen.
We've operated under this hierarchy of humans are better than animals, whites are better than blacks, men are better than women, straights are better than gays. And if all those other groups, which are further down the ladder, start to rise up, we push back using all kinds of fear tactics and quoting scripture out of context to sort of hold on desperately to what we have. Because we're living through sort of the last days of the privileged white male. And I think that's part of what the Trump presidency represents. White people won't even be the majority in another 50 years. We don't really like the way that feels, but that's what's coming.
I'm fourth generation classical Pentecostal fundamentalist Christian. So I can address this not as an outsider, but as an insider. Carlton Pearson. The world knows me as bishop, but I don't look like a bishop, so I look like a son of a bishop. That's what they think.
Pastor Carlton Pearson will tell you that Tulsa is the city of his prime and of his crime. His ministry was a sudden and bright supernova before it burned out in a spectacular crash that left Pearson shattered for straying from the story as it had always been told.
I think that the church itself in America has become corrupt and eroded and tired. And we have an elite attitude of superiority. Christianity itself feels that it's the chosen group. We're the chosen people. This is the chosen country. This is the chosen culture. We must own it and control it and keep it pure so we can evangelize the world. And that's why they like Trump. Trump is the closest thing to their image of an angry, vengeful God who says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay. I'm a jealous God. Thou shalt have no other God but me. You're my chosen people.
We were really never a Christian nation. Our Constitution made certain of that.
It was a rare thing to have kind of non-religiously identified, people in power all the way from the beginning of the country. But yet this kind of general sense of a theistic belief that was roughly Christian.
Christianity was kind of assumed because it's just in the water. There's not a lot else around. But they're not founding a Christian nation.
Washington's a really interesting example. On the one hand, he really does see religion as tied up with morality, and morality tied up with the success of the democratic experiment in the U.S. He also, though, is very clear from the beginning that it's not overtly Christian. The early Jewish community saw themselves and experienced themselves as this extreme minority, non-Christian group, and they were wondering, where's our place in the country? And he wrote this beautiful letter back to them where he said, we are founded as a nation based on the Constitution, and the only thing required for one to be a good citizen is to affirm the principles of the Constitution. We will not be a place where bigotry takes root.
It wasn't just these lawmakers saying this. They had allies in the clerical community. There's a Baptist minister of this period, this colonial period, named John Leland. He believed in his religious convictions very strongly, but he absolutely insisted that everybody should have the right to make their own decisions about religion.
One place where you really see the power of Christianity really on the negative side of U.S. history is the issue of slavery. We really don't get the Civil War and the kind of moral arguments around justifying slavery without it being rooted in biblical arguments.
Looking at sermons that were preached during the Civil War, it's really clear that those who were for slavery had the better arguments from the Bible. The Bible's pretty clear, slavery's okay. The abolitionists had a terribly difficult time overturning them because they really had to disagree with the Bible. There's another way to look at it, though. The whole Exodus experience for Israel is Israel coming out of slavery. And that becomes a kind of primary theme, you know, that this freedom from slavery. You have Paul saying in Galatians, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. He says within this body of Christ, there is no distinction. Now, it took the church a long time to figure that out.
Virtually every white Protestant denomination split over the Civil War and the slavery question. Most of them came back together in the early part of the 20th century. Southern Baptists have remained split to this day from their northern brethren. That began to be the fault line, really, that we've been living with through the 20th century, and that is still largely with us today, that you can see in voting patterns, you can see in political activity, and even in theological differences.
I was born and raised here in Oklahoma, and so the fact that we're a very religious state and that our population expects their legislators to be very religious and, quite frankly, expects them to be Christian does not surprise me.
I came up with the phrase, the Rev and the Rep, in our 2014 campaign when Colin ran the first time unsuccessfully. But I thought, oh man, that would be such a fun way to connect us and to talk about how our work is really not that different.
The Republicans hold about 68 of the seats, while Democrats hold about 28 of the seats. So we are outnumbered.
A lot of young people are leaving the state of Oklahoma because of regressive taxes, of closed-mindedness, of the conservative culture here. And we thought about it, but came to the conclusion that our family is here. We love this place.
Oklahoma has a history of being a populous state. We have a history of being proud of our ability to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps.
And so it's our responsibility to insert ourselves in the conversation.
My name is Colin Walke. I represent House District 87 in Northwest Oklahoma City. In 2017, 3 bills were ran to raise the minimum wage in the state of Oklahoma, and not a single one received a hearing. As a result, this year I'm running my own minimum wage bill that would raise the minimum wage to $11 per hour.
In Oklahoma, we talk about family values all the time. Meanwhile, we pass legislation that makes it harder and harder on families.
We have passed nothing but shameful budgets for the past 6-8 years. We continue to cut education. We've cut education spending more than any other state in the nation. We've cut aid to DHS, to the Department of Mental Health. There's 2 reasons why I think a lot of these conservative, social spending cut-oriented bills get passed from a religious perspective. The first one is that the individuals who run these bills have a sincere belief that what you believe, as far as whether Jesus is your Lord and Savior, is more important than what you actually do.
Most Christians think Jesus came and he founded Christianity and the church started and you're off to the races. And depending on what your denomination is, that's what the early disciples were doing. So for Methodists, they're all singing hymns, you know, and for Catholics, they're all saying Mass. And none of these early folks in what you might call the Jesus movement think they're Christians. They think they're some form of Jews. They're in a Jewish reform movement in one way or another. All of these reform movements, Pharisaism, what becomes Christianity, the Jesus movements, and that, they're all dealing with a couple of similar problems. One is the thing nobody wants to talk about but determines everything, and that's Rome. They're living in the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire is an empire. It's not Pax Romana, Roman peace. It's only Pax if you're Romana. If you're something else, it's called oppression. It's too dangerous to be Jewish, and the empire keeps this pressure on. And one of the big drivers in the 2nd century is the rise of Marcion, who comes along and he really reads Paul as being anti-Jewish. And he makes a collection of Paul's letter and something looking like the Gospel of Luke And that becomes his Gospels. And that becomes his New Testament. So you've got this political pressure, you've got this emerging new set of scriptures that begins to push the group to identify itself quite differently as over against what is now trying to identify itself as Judaism. So both movements are engaged in self-identification, which pushes them apart. The key player here is Constantine. In 321, he calls the Council of Nicaea. He begins to favor Christianity. He doesn't make it the official religion of the empire. That comes later. But he does favor it. He wanted Christianity to help unify the empire because the empire really lacked a kind of coherent ideological foundation, and he thought Christianity could provide that. The problem was Christianity was divided itself because it's doing all this self-definition. It's not all that unified. And so he calls the Council of Nicaea, which is fascinating. The first ecumenical council is called by a Roman emperor who wasn't even Christian. They meet in an old pagan temple, and they argue and argue and argue. They don't really know where they're going to go. Eusebius, who was there, describes it, he surrounded the temple with troops and cut off the food supply, and you get the Nicene Creed. That's a little quick and facile, but there is a certain amount of force to him. He will not let them out until they agree. And so the point of the creed is to create unity. The point of the creed is also to exclude those who don't agree. So a creed has both a unifying aspect to it and an exclusive aspect. It gets rid of folks, and it still functions that way today. The other thing that's really important to notice about the creed is it changes what becomes the new Christian movement. And it's really, in a way, you can say, who invented Christianity? The Nicene Creed, Constantine. Because it shifts Christianity from being a religion of praxis, like Judaism, it's what you do that matters, into being a matter of belief. We don't throw people out of church because they don't sell everything and give it to the poor. We will throw them out of church if they don't say the Nicene Creed.
My dad grew up in this very conservative world, and actually at one time was very enamored of it, wanted to be one of the Church of Christ's great boy preachers. And in that denomination, you didn't have to go to seminary. You just had to show promise, and the elders would lay hands on you and say, go get 'em, sick 'em. You've got the gift. And my dad started driving around in the little towns in eastern Oklahoma preaching at age 15. And he was quite the spellbinding preacher. And then he went off to World War II. He left the farm. He met all kinds of people willing to die for him who were Methodists, Presbyterians. They would take a bullet, and they weren't even going to get into heaven, according to his childhood theology. But my dad said, I saw this world that was bigger than I had ever been taught the world was. And all these people believed in different things, and surely God loved them too. Surely the Presbyterian had a chance to get into heaven. Maybe even the Buddhist could get into heaven, or the Jew could get into heaven. Surely the world I've been shown is too small. And he just sort of outgrew it and left it and became a congregational minister after he left the Church of Christ. Then I sort of heard him in a free pulpit questioning the Vietnam War, conventional nuclear power, pushing for women's rights and civil rights, and I thought, whoa, this is kind of exciting. This might be a good way to spend my life, doing that, if I could do it without getting fired. One of the first things we did at Mayflower was we started marrying gay people long before it was legal. We just made up our own marriage licenses because we couldn't get one from the state. We thought we might drive 100 people out, and what happened was 100 more people came. And so I learned something at that point about going ahead and saying what I really thought. And the hunger for that in people's lives, and for them to feel like church was going to be an honest place. They could agree, they could disagree, but they could believe that what was being said is what the preacher really thought. That sort of set this church on a new trajectory.
I have only one announcement, but it's a very important one. Notice is hereby given of a special meeting of this congregation to be held today at noon in this sanctuary to discuss and vote upon a plan to join the sanctuary movement. Your attendance and participation will be deeply appreciated.
So here we are, on the edge of a congregational meeting and a congregational vote to discern how we as a church will respond to the crisis faced by our undocumented neighbors who are threatened by heightened ICE activities and oppressed by unjust immigration policy. Since the beginning, our country has used race and ethnicity to determine who can come, who can work, and who can stay. Even though I wanted to keep it brief, the history of racism in this country is long. The 1790 Naturalization Act excluded non-white people from eligibility to naturalize. In 1882, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. The 1917 Immigration Act banned immigration from most Asian countries. Prior to 1965, residents of only 3 countries, Ireland, Germany, and the United Kingdom, all overwhelmingly white, were given nearly 70% of the visas available to enter the US. The policy was clear: white people in, brown people out. I believe Mayflower Church should be a sanctuary church, both on paper and in practice.
I'm not in favor of partisan politics in the pulpit. Nobody ever is told here who to vote for or what side of an issue God is on. There is, however, a politics of the gospel, and everybody's free to interpret that the way they see fit. I'm not trying to get other people to interpret it the way I do, but I think not trying to interpret the politics of the gospel, which has to do with how we treat people, how we relate to our enemy, whether we're compassionate, whether we're forgiving, all those things, has to be interpreted and applied to the current political, economic, social situation of America, or you're not preaching. You're just sort of offering people a history lesson that's usually pretty boring.
Growing up as a Southern Baptist, my family's life really revolved around the church. I can distinctly remember before the age of 8, just standing or sitting in the pew while everyone else received communion around me and noting the exclusion without praying the sinner's prayer and asking Jesus to be your personal savior. If you die, you're gonna go to hell and spend eternity in that place where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. The other option is for you to have accepted Jesus as your savior, and that is your ticket to heaven. St. Peter lets you in and you get a mansion, which we sing hymns about that. I could sing you a couple of Over the Hilltop. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop in that bright land where, I mean, and the examples go on. We grew up singing songs like that.
I had lunch with my friend. She said, your granddaughter was in the paper again this morning. But I hadn't read the paper that morning. But there you are, and I thought that was a real good picture. And of course, I'd never seen a picture of
Robin,
of the lead
Yeah, we don't actually get very many pictures together.
A lot of it's not fair for the persons involved. And my opinion is, who am I to judge? And that's what I think people are mostly doing, is judging. And I'm not for that.
Maybe I should have said that at the press conference.
You think you should have?
Yeah, well, I'll do that. I'll say that next time. I like that.
Well, Lori and I have always been talkers.
Mm-hmm. And we've talked about all kinds of things, even stuff we don't see completely eye to eye on. And from my perspective, one of the things that I am most grateful to you for is the idea that you should talk about it. You should talk about things, even if you disagree.
I agree.
You know, you were an important part of my spiritual development and faith formation. And it happened without me, you know, really knowing it was happening. So I have sort of encyclopedic knowledge of hymns, and that's your doing. Can you sing a little bit of it, Grandma?
Will you sing with me?
Sure.
Oh,
dim golden slippers, oh, dim golden slippers,
them golden slippers I'm gonna wear, walk them golden streets. Oh, them golden slippers, oh, them golden slippers, them golden slippers I'm gonna wear and walk them golden streets. Can you see me with 3 little girls going down the road in a pickup and singing songs like that? But they all sang them.
Before you guys came in and I came in the house, how I knew she was nervous about this, because she knew that we were going to ask about me being in the paper, and particularly about, you know, the headline, Minister Decries LGBTQ discrimination. I come in, give her a hug, tell her thank you for doing this, and she says, I just want to know one thing. Are you going to go to heaven when you die? Which is her way of asking me, are you saved? Do you still consider Jesus to be your personal savior? And yeah, I do think I'm gonna go to heaven when I die. I did not also add, I don't think that there is a hell, so I don't think anybody is going to hell. Because that kind of conversation, well, it doesn't do anybody any good at this point. She's not gonna change her mind, and I'm not gonna change mine. And what I do appreciate is that she cares enough to ask. She cares enough to ask, because it matters to her. And if I didn't matter to her, she wouldn't worry about it. But she is.
It was not until college that I was completely removed from my environment of origin and experienced some new people and new situations that really pushed me to question the things I had been taught about God and about people who are different than I am. I'm on the basketball team and developing relationships and friendships with my teammates, some of whom happen to be lesbians. And this was really the first time I was able to develop a genuine friendship with someone who wasn't straight. And I won't pretend that I would have said to them, I'm an open and affirming person for all LGBTQ people. That's not where I was at the time. And, you know, I was struggling with what I had been taught to think about homosexuality, but having in this other hand my teammates who were real people and good people, people who were compassionate and kind and hardworking, who also loved God. And so that was a really transformative time for me.
Are you going up to the church today?
Yes, that clinic starts at 10, and I think it lasts until 4 or maybe 5.
I started at Oklahoma City University School of Law, where I ran into Colin, who I would eventually marry. And it was very clear to me early on that he was someone who encouraged questions and was ready to explore new ways of thinking and had done some of that work himself already. He actually was a Mayflower member at the time.
I started going to Mayflower in about 2006, 2007 after reading some articles by Robin Myers. At that time, I wasn't particularly diligent in my religion, if you will. And I started reading about this minister who was in favor of LGBT rights, who was against the war in Iraq. And I just thought, this guy can't be real, and he certainly can't be a Christian minister in the heartland of America.
So we would go to this 8:30 a.m. service at Mayflower and hear Robin Myers offer this new theology. And then we would go to the 10:30 service at Grand Boulevard Baptist Church, where we were hearing theology like God sent Hurricane Katrina to New Orleans because of the sin in that city. It did not take me very long to say, you know what, I've got to take myself out of this other situation. I'll find a way to serve a new church and offer my gifts to God in a different setting.
I have never had an associate minister before I had Lori Walke as an associate minister. And that's been just like a gift that's just been dropped in our laps. And not only because women preach differently, understand the world differently, but a whole group of people are now listening and understanding Christianity in a way that's different because Lori's explaining it to them.
From what we can tell, early Christianity is very open to women. Paul knows female apostles. Not many Christians know that, but in fact, if they would actually read the Bible instead of just look at it, they would find that out. So you have women in positions of authority. You have women well into the 2nd century into positions of authority. You have the Gospel of Mary, for example, and some of these kinds of texts which didn't make it into the canon, but which Christians ought to read if they want to know what's going on. There's some wonderful art pieces. They're called the Praying Women. The most distinctively Christian images in pre-Constantinian art is of a woman praying. And you find them in tombs, in catacombs, all over the place. We have a large number of these. This praying woman, and the Romans pray like this with their hand out, is a distinctively Christian image. It's never discussed in the male literature, but it occurs in these catacombs, and it represents the Christian. So, you know, what do you make of this? The most distinctive image is of a praying woman. That's what a Christian looks like. That's how a Christian sees himself or herself, as a praying woman. That's against the values of the Roman Empire. That's very anti-patriarchal, okay? That goes away with Constantine.
So we're headed to the Oklahoma State Capitol. I am chaplain of the week for the House of Representatives. Last year, when I was chaplain of the week, my prayers were a little different than what they were used to, I guess, and upset a few of the ultra-conservative representatives.
We begin each day in the State House of Representatives with a prayer. It's typically always a Christian prayer, and it's typically always from a conservative viewpoint.
There's some resistance in the Capitol to women clergy, and Colin had to fight for me to be able to pray this week.
Despite the fact that we do have separation of church and state, there's always been this little carve out for certain ceremonial practices that occur in government. Chaplains are one of them. And that sounds great on its face, but it can be problematic when somebody comes in and says something controversial, or when a member of an unpopular religious group wants to come in and give this right.
There was controversy about the new chaplaincy policy, which said that you had to be invite somebody that was a member of your own faith. So they changed their policy, and they said that they would hire a house chaplain, and that would be the chaplain of the day for everyone. And anyone who had not been confirmed up until that point would not be allowed to be minister of the day. Even though I had submitted Lori at the beginning of session, they had not yet confirmed her. So I went to the representative who's in charge of the chaplaincy program, and I told him he had two choices. He could either identify my wife as the minister of the week, or I was going to go to the press and call him out for being a sexist.
Sexist, and what else did you say?
Xenophobic, bigot, all of that. Because at the end of the day, that was the problem with the chaplaincy policy as they instituted it. We do not have any Muslims in the House. We do not have any Jews in the House. We do not have any Hindus in the House. So it's already a Christian-only club, and that's not the way this should be. It should be ecumenical in nature.
White evangelicals, they make up 17% of the population. They made up 26% of voters in the last election cycle. The way to understand some political space is that our ballot box acts a little bit like a time machine. It takes us back about 10 years in terms of our history and demographic change. And the main reason for that is that white Christians vote at higher rates than other citizens do. So it means that they are able to be overrepresented at the ballot box in a way, much higher rates than they are in the general population.
Members, offering our invocation this week is Reverend Lori Walkie of the Mayflower Congregational Church in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Reverend Walkie, you're recognized.
This is our hope, Holy One, as the representatives in this room make decisions for our beloved state, that these women and men remember that they have one job, and that's to make this corner of the earth a little brighter. Dark shadows threaten to overwhelm so many. The 75,000 low-income Oklahomans who need health care for their families. Our teachers who need money, not just the motto printed on it. These representatives, depending on how they light up the voting board, could turn this place into a city upon a hill.
Evangelicals used to think that you took care of your own soul and you did not sully yourself with the things of the world. You did not get involved in politics.
Jerry Falwell Sr., for example, as late as the mid-1960s, was still delivering sermons saying, political stuff is not the realm of pastors. We should stay out. Now, he was mostly motivated to say that to criticize Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr.
Let us march on battle boxes till brotherhood is more than a meaningless word at the end of the prayer, but the first order of business on every legislative agenda. Let us march on ballot boxes. Let us march on ballot boxes till we are able to send to the state houses of the South men who will do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with their God. Let us march on ballot boxes.
If we'd been having this interview a generation ago, we would still be talking about the solid Democratic South, right? Now, today, it's the solid Republican South. Well, how did that happen? The real mark for this shift is when the Democratic Party becomes identified with civil rights.
Let us close the springs of racial poison. Let us pray for wise and understanding hearts.
Then what begins to happen is that whites in the South, who have been voting Democratic for generations, largely because the Republican Party was the Emancipation Party and they were the slave-owning party, began to take flight to the Republican Party. The parties begin to shift their positions, so the Democratic Party becomes the party of civil rights. The Republican Party begins increasingly to become the party of law and order and really pushing back on civil rights.
This is a nation of laws, and as Abraham Lincoln has said, no one is above the law, no one is below the law, and we're going to enforce the law, and Americans should remember that if we're going to have law and order.
White evangelicals can see that the tide of history is shifting and they're on the losing end of the racial argument. The kind of precipitating spark here was actually Bob Jones University having a dating policy that prohibited interracial dating on campus. And that ran afoul of federal civil rights laws. So there was a lawsuit filed. If they were going to take government money, they couldn't then have this ban on interracial dating on campus.
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court, I speak for the petitioner Bob Jones University.
It was an evangelical Christian college. So they really took a religious liberty argument on this and said this is federal intervention into a religious issue, and we have a right to make these kinds of bans and keep the races apart because we understand that to be a biblically mandated thing.
All of the policies followed by the university are obligatory upon the university as dictated by Scripture.
White evangelicals really pushed back into the national scene after this incident with Bob Jones University. You immediately see, like in Jerry Falwell Sr., for example, within 2 or 3 years, he has completely flipped his position, becomes one of the architects of the Christian right political movement.
There is no Bible Belt in America. There's a Bible cloak in America that covers the whole blooming republic, and they're everywhere ready for the leadership preachers that you and I can offer them, and let's give it to them. That's right. We have a threefold primary responsibility. Number one, get people saved. Number two, get them baptized. Number three, get them registered to vote.
The Christian right political movement basically picks up other issues as it goes. So it picks up opposition to gay rights, and it picks up opposition to abortion.
When the Roe v. Wade abortion issue really hit hard, the main group that was opposed to abortion were Catholics.
The first big meeting of the Southern Baptists after Roe v. Wade, they actually affirmed the Roe v. Wade decision.
It's only much later that evangelical Protestants got on the bandwagon of Roe v. Wade. In traditional religion and in traditional cultures, a woman does not control her body. A man does, whether her father or her husband. And, virtually nobody would own up today to say a woman was a male property. But that's the way it was up until fairly recently. But a lot of the artifacts of that are still in place. Birth control, the woman's right to control her own fertility, not to have her husband control it, has become a fundamental issue, maybe the last straw in women being co-equal.
And it wasn't until the political movement picked up steam that issue got kind of inserted into the political platform and really pushed down from the top.
Here in Dallas, the religious right and the political right formally wed. The 1980 Religious Roundtable was dominated by Baptist pastors and evangelists, and W.A. Criswell performed the vow.
Ronald Reagan.
Thank you, Dr. Richard. Now, I know this is a nonpartisan gathering,
And so I know that you can't endorse me, but I only brought that up because I want you to know that I endorse you and what you're doing.
In Ronald Reagan, the fundamentalist found a politician who read the Bible as literally as they do.
That I continue to look to the scriptures today for fulfillment and for guidance. Indeed, it is an incontrovertible fact that all the complex and horrendous questions confronting us at home and worldwide have their answer in that single book.
I'm sick and tired of hearing about all of the radicals and the perverts and the liberals and the leftists and the communists coming out of the closets. It's time for God's people to come out of the closets, out of the churches, and change America. We must do it.
Christianity is deeply inculcated and woven into the fabric of this country's nature. We sing the Star Spangled Banner, One Nation Under God, and part of our allegiance, there's always this references to God. And most of the voters are passionate when they have fear. I've noticed that even with offerings now, I'm sort of in the New Thought community, there's no fear of God or fear of hell. And so the offerings are smaller because you can't use fear to say, God is going to judge you if you don't do this.
There's no more powerful force in politics than fear. We see it now all the time. Be afraid, be very afraid of Muslim extremists, immigrants who are going to take your job, women who are going to take your masculinity. You name it, we tell people to be afraid all the time. Religious folk, preachers, use this divide and conquer strategy.
In the days before my father passed away in 2007, he joked with CNN that he dreamed that Chelsea Clinton had interviewed him about the 3 greatest threats facing this nation. He replied, those 3 greatest threats are Osama, Obama, and your mama.
The U.S. has become a dumping ground for everybody else's problems. On day 1, we will begin working on an impenetrable, physical, tall, powerful, beautiful southern border wall. They're sending us not the right people. It's coming from more than Mexico. It's coming from all over South and Latin America, and it's coming probably from the Middle East.
I had this introduction all planned about the theological rationale of the sanctuary movement, and then Lori preached that sermon, and so it becomes completely redundant. So, what Lori said. Okay? This is obviously an important decision that the congregation should be making. And each of you who are members of this church in good standing are allowed to cast a vote on the ballots that we will be providing you. And now we have some special guests here.
My name is Judith. I'm a beneficiary of Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA. And I've been working with Oklahoma City Public Schools. The way that I'm involved with my community is organizing through Dream Act Oklahoma and getting information out there to my community. What is the church going to do to protect the community?
There are over 800 churches in the United States that have declared themselves to be sanctuary churches. So we're not going into this alone. I'm going to read the ballot that you're going to be looking at so you'll understand the 3 choices that are provided. A, do nothing at this time. Option B, declare Mayflower to be a sanctuary church, with the understanding that this includes the full meaning of sanctuary, which includes knowingly hiding individuals who are in the midst of a deportation action or transporting them, subject to a charge of felony. Or C, join the sanctuary movement and join together with all kinds of organizations providing all kinds of resources in this church and outside this church as part of that movement. Those are the 3 choices, and I know you have questions, and we're going to try to answer them.
I don't want to go to jail. I would miss my husband. I would miss my dog. I'm extremely risk averse. But if we follow the teachings, there's no choice but to vote for B. That is my intention, to vote for B. I'm willing to risk my license as a nurse, but fortunately my boss is Japanese American whose parents were in an internment camp. I don't think he would fire me for having a felony. And I guarantee you, if you guys are in jail, it's going to be a pretty darn crowded jail cell.
I'm a kindergarten teacher. On November 9th, I did not teach. I held crying Hispanic children the entire day.
I worry a lot for a lot of my families. It's hard for them and for me. All of their energy, if they're scared, if they're worried, all 22 of them, it just comes with them, and we unpack it how we can, and we try to learn to read. So if we're passing to the post, we will do one of these. We refer to counseling, like divorce, death, and deportation is an actual counseling referral for us for an external counseling service, because it is a frequent experience of our kids here in Oklahoma City Public Schools.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Kaiser!
The rest of you feel ready to vote, please cast a vote. We're going to accept whatever level of risk you authorize. So please go ahead and mark your ballots and pass them forward, and we'll get a count going, and we'll let you know what the results are.
Right now, we've got people fooled into believing that if you are a Christian, you automatically vote conservative family values. But just look at the gospel itself and see what Jesus was up to. Everything he does indicates that it's what you do that makes you a religious person, not what you believe.
Most evangelicals and Pentecostals believe that God loves everybody, but he only likes us because we accepted Christ. Everybody else is going to hell.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my happy privilege and pleasure to present the man that God has raised up with a message for your deliverance. God's man for this hour, the Reverend Oral Roberts.
You really can't understand the religious right until you look into its early roots. In the early 70s, Oral Roberts was pulling in something like $50 million a month in 1970 dollars. The amount of influence that he held on a national level, he was an integral part of creating the whole structure of the religious right.
Big Mama picked me up just like I was, took me out into the living room. That's the way Jesus does. He goes into the bedroom of your defeat, of your illness, of your bad self-image. He pulls the blankets of sin off of you, scoops you up into his arms, and brings you out into the living room of life, and washes you with his blood, and tells you you're his. He loves you just the way you are, and somehow you qualify. I'll never forget that.
I was affiliated with the healing ministry of Oral Roberts here for 40 years. The laying on of hands, the anointing with oil. All my parents and grandparents and godparents on both sides did that kind of thing.
Oral Roberts really kind of saw him as his successor in ways, which for Oral was a revolutionary move.
I love this man. I mean, I loved him like family. He took me in from the day I met him in August of 1971. The first thing he said to me was, "Do you sing?" And I said, "I try." Talked to my son. We want to get you in the World Action Singers. He wanted an integrated team, not just blacks, but Hispanics and everything. And Oral was always for the underdog. He grew up in abject poverty and ignorance as a poor little Pentecostal boy. He always hated that aspect of his life. He understood it and was happy when his audiences became not only Pentecostal, but Methodist and Baptist and Catholic, as the Holy Ghost movement, the charismatic movement was moving into non-Pentecostal church. We call it neo-Pentecostalism. And he was like the godfather of that movement. We used to get 32,000 pieces of mail a day. at Oral's peak when I was there as associate evangelist. We were on nationwide television. Christians, Pentecostals owned all the major Christian televisions, not the Baptists and the non-Pentecostals. Oral had the highest viewership anybody, sacred or secular, on Sunday mornings from the time people started watching till about noon. We had our university. Jim Baker had Heritage USA, second most visited tourist spot in America. Pat Robertson had the Regents University and the 700 Club and a whole network. Man, we were just kicking butt and taking names. We had it covered. So we thought we're the most evangelistic people on the planet.
Got my war clothes on. Got my war clothes on. I got my war clothes on. Got my war clothes on.
Underneath all of that fundamentalism, that kind of nativistic charismatic religion, there's a dualism that really comes out historically of Neoplatonism. They're about saving your soul. And they talk about being soul savers. And the soul is the real you. It's the authentic thing. And actually in Neoplatonism, it's divine. Christianity has to kind of do away with that, but it still has it in many ways. And the body becomes evil. Men become the soul part, women become the body part. I mean, this just plays out in horrendous ways. And they have a kind of literalist view of hell, that people will go to hell and pay for their sins.
See, that's Oral's physical hand on the right, a physical replica. None of that was here when I came. The chapel wasn't here, Howard Auditorium, the quad, this was all just woods and weeds.
Carlton, in reading the Bible, kind of got onto this notion that you can't really find that in the Bible. I mean, most of the imagery that most people have of hell comes from Dante and Bunyan, not from the Bible. The Bible is really pretty modest and non-existent on this topic. And Carlton began to see that, like a lot of mystics, became kind of overwhelmed, I think, with the love of God, and therefore could not envision a loving God destroying evil people in hell. And that was a no-go.
And he started preaching universalism from his pulpit. And his congregation didn't like it at all. And it shrank down to almost nothing. He lost all of his standing because he allowed himself to keep growing theologically and then was unafraid to say what he really believed.
My old parents, you know, they were so proud of me because of what I'd done. You have to take all that into consideration. My sisters, everybody was embarrassed. You know, everybody was proud to be my cousin. That's my cousin Carlton. That's my brother. And one of my nephews left the country, moved away, didn't talk to us for a long time, called me an educated fool. We hurt so many people. And that, it wasn't about me being hurt. It was about me inflicting pain on innocent people. They had believed this stuff all their lives. I taught them after they taught me. Now they're old and tired. And they were so proud of me because I taught that boy in Sunday school. Look what he's doing today. I saw him on television the other day. Those kind of things. Those were precious to them. I would hold those little ladies. And there was no way I could fix it. The hardest part of that whole thing was losing the church, the physical plant, and being basically a churchless, like a homeless family. They're more panicky about the no hell thing, because if you say there's no hell, then there's no need for Jesus, and oh my God, you gotta have Jesus. I never thought anybody would ever attribute the word heretic to me. It just wasn't in my mind at all. It just means choice or opinion, or you to choose differently from others. Heretics in Hebrew, Greek. So the whole idea of getting out of the traditions or the traded down ideologies and ideas and, you know, developing an independent way of thinking is dangerous.
Here are the results of the vote of Mayflower Church. Those who voted for A, which was to do nothing at this time, 12. Those who voted for B, declare ourselves in the fullest sense a sanctuary church, 128. And those who voted for C, which are activities, all of which are subsumed under B, 63. So, by a 2-to-1 margin, the congregation has voted to declare itself to be a sanctuary church. Here we go.
We're the first congregation in Oklahoma to declare itself a sanctuary church. When you preach the gospel, you have to be political, but it's the politics of the gospel. It's not partisan politics, like God's a Republican or a Democrat, which is an absurd idea to begin with. If all of us do matter, and that's what we choose to believe, then that means not just privileged white people sitting alone, cloistered in church and worrying about their souls.
Over and over again, we kept hearing that they needed us to be public and very clear publicly that we were going to fight for laws that were just and treated immigrants as the human beings that they are.
Hello.
Hi. Hola.
Hello, John. Hello.
Yo soy de Guatemala, de una parte de lo que es Quetzaltenango.
We have a pediatric oncologist in our church who made us aware of a child that has a sort of juvenile form of Hodgkin's disease and is also on the autism spectrum. His mother is undocumented, and she is terrified that she's going to be deported, and there's nobody to take care of her son, John.
El tratamiento, él lo tiene solamente aquí. Soy yo la única a la que le llevo a mi nene en sus tratamientos, su quimioterapia. Solo yo le entiendo a mi nene el momento y la hora, lo que él quiere comer, como él no me habla. ¿Qué sería de mi nene que si ellos me llegaran a encerrar?
We're going to go with you today.
Gracias.
There will be many people there to support you.
Mil gracias.
One of the things that gets talked about over and over again, there's a kind of saying, there are 3 people for whom God has special care: widows, orphans, and foreigners. The foreigners are the illegal aliens in your land, okay? Because those are the 3 people who have nobody to protect them. So if God doesn't protect them, they're in real trouble. And it's kind of odd. Here we are 3,000 years later, and we're still arguing about the same 3 darn questions. Jesus and Joseph and Mary are forced into Egypt, which historically for Jews is the place of slavery. See, but now it's going to be the place of liberation. It's going to be the place of safety. They are, from our point of view, crossing the border illegally. You know, now if there had been a wall, they would have been trapped on the wrong side and the whole story would have stopped. So if you're going to take a Bible position, certainly you should be for illegal immigrants. That's where the Bible comes out. It's on their side.
Did you tell them what happened? Okay. Okay, it's not terrible. I mean, yeah, a little small stay until we can do some more advocating, letter writing, political pressure sort of thing. So we're going to get to work on that. They're going to put a tracker on her ankle, which
But not house arrest, just a tracker.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
That was the clarification.
Right. So she knows she has friends and people helping her out, and that meant a lot to her. That's where we are.
All we were saying was, we're not going to let what's happening in this country to our immigrant sisters and brothers go unnoticed. We're not going to just be silent, because we've been silent at some pretty critical moments in American history, and we wished we hadn't been.
You know, one of the, I guess, the biggest marks of today's religious landscape is the rise in the number of people who are not religious. If you go back to the 1990s, it's still only less than 10% of the country claims no religious affiliation. Today, that's a quarter of the country. And if you look at young people, it's 4 in 10.
I happen to believe the church is dying in its old form and will continue to die in its old form. 9 churches a day close their doors on average in the United States. That doesn't worry me. That doesn't worry me. Social justice churches will thrive, especially now.
Let the sun shine. Let the sun shine. The sun shine. Can you sing that with me? Let the sun shine. Let the sun
Have you been following the legislature's hurtful and heartbreaking Bill 1140? It's proposed to give private adoption agencies the right to take public funding and then discriminate against people based on the agency's religious beliefs. Now, what this means is that a qualified family can be blocked from adopting by a religious agency because the family's Muslim or atheist or single or a same-sex couple. We still have time to stop this from going through, and I would appreciate your help in doing that. I'm inviting you into an act of religious freedom. Here at All Souls, our focus is not to try to save people from a hell in the afterlife that we cannot see, but to save people from very real hells in this life that we can see.
Robin Myers reached out to me pretty early and said, we need as many progressive thinkers in this state as possible. I'd read some of his books, I saw what he'd done, and I really admired Robin and looked up to him.
Good morning, church. You're in the right place. This is All Souls Church. This is a beautiful day in which we are living. When Dr. King said, yes, the road to justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle, and you gotta have some passionate concern by dedicated individuals. When Dr. King was speaking like that, he was trying to say, so therefore don't sit on the side and whine. He was trying to tell you, come on now, because we are moving towards something that's transcendent. We are moving towards justice. I don't want to preach this morning. But I'm trying to tell y'all that you in for it. We got Reverend Dr. Bishop Carlton Pearson coming up. Yeah. So get ready for this. Let us hear this song, because if you listen to it, you might learn something. Come on.
Long as you're living, always remember you'll never beat life. So don't try and cheat life. Sisters and brothers, do unto others. Love's for enjoying, hate's for destroying. Never forget it, or you'll regret it as long as you're living. Forgive me if I seem to preach, but there is something that I have to say, a message that...
Wow, that's you dangerous little girl. Ella would
walk down that aisle and just kiss you. We were raised with a Bible and a belt. If they couldn't preach the gospel in those, they'd beat the devil out of us. They'd go to jail for that today. But you can also carry guns. They're trying to put forth legislation in this state where people who've had no vetting, no preliminary examinations, no questioning, any random person can walk around like in cowboy days and carry guns. That's insane. Especially while the psychologists are telling us that 1 out of 5 people you meet are mentally ill. Count down the road. If that one has a gun, slap him. So you can go out today when we finish and ask Governor Fallon to veto permitless carry. But we talk about faith in God, but it's really fear in guns, and Bible or bullets or ballots. We've never had such polarization in our country or in our culture before. And I think that All Souls is a part of a new spiritual paradigm right here in the city of Tulsa.
The first time that Carlton Pearson came onto my radar, I had just come to Tulsa a year or so earlier, and there was the issue of Bush's faith-based initiatives became a big national issue. I was speaking against them. He was speaking for them. And then a few years later, Carlton came out with this new gospel of inclusion. And so I reached out to him because he was being denigrated in the media and in all kinds of other ways in the churches. And so I reached out to him to say, hey, there are a lot of others who think like you. And about a third to a half of his members joined at that time.
I used to go drive by there and say, it looks like such an innocent little place. How can all those demons live in there? They didn't like all of us Black Pentecostals coming in there at first. I was willing to go. And he wouldn't have it. Marlon would not have it. And a lot of their people wouldn't have it.
Also started in 1921 at the same year as the Tulsa race riot happened.
The founder of All Souls Unitarian Church owned the Tulsa Tribune and initiated the terrible massacre that took place because of the way he reported things in the newspaper.
The first time I found out about the Tulsa massacre, I was almost 30 years old. I'm sitting in a church in Chicago, Illinois, and the pastor begins to talk about the excellence of Black Wall Street. And I'm like, oh, well, this sounds interesting. Well, then he says that the Black Wall Street takes place in the Greenwood District in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I'm like, wait a second, I'm from Tulsa. And he tells the story of how just 2 generations out of slavery, African Americans built this incredible city in the shadows of Jim Crow. There are doctors, there are lawyers, and there are Black teachers, Black schools. And these people are excellent.
Nobody knows about it. I didn't know. I was here for years before I ever heard of that.
On May 31st, in 1921, a girl by the name of Sarah Page is an elevator operator in a building downtown. And a young African-American boy who's a shoe shiner had to go to the restroom. And so he chose the building that I guess Sarah Page was in. And he's going up the elevator, and the elevator supposedly jerks. There's a scream, and Dick Rowland comes running out of the elevator after Sarah Page screams. Some people say that Dick Rowland assaulted Sarah Page, and there's a warrant for his arrest. The next day, there's a warrant for his arrest.
The Tribune was published in the evening, and so when Dick Rowland was arrested, the paper that night said, "Nab a Negro tonight" was the headline of the paper right on the front pages. And they're telling this story about Dick Rowland supposedly accosting a white woman. And in 1921 in America, that was grounds often for lynching and all kinds of mob violence.
Hours later, there are angry white Tulsans coming across the railroad tracks to burn down this community.
It was 34 blocks of businesses and homes and people that were destroyed and killed in that devastation. It's known as the Tulsa Race Riot, but in essence it was white people coming into the black community and wholesale destroying that community. And so massacre is a more appropriate word for what happened. Because Tulsa kept silent about the events of 1921 for so long, there was a conspiracy of silence both in the white community and in the black community, and still today, it's hard work to bring people together across race in Tulsa.
I come from a very Pentecostal background. My upbringing was in the Pentecostal church, the Church of God in Christ, and I was Church of God in Christ born and bred, and would never have imagined myself at my age now, being with a Unitarian congregation. In August, it'll be 10 years that we've been here as a part of All Souls. I will say that it is not without some challenge when these black people are perceived as invading a space that has been pretty exclusively white for, 8 decades.
It's one thing to put your dollars to it, to march towards it, to sign legislation and to do a sermon. I said, but it's another thing when someone brings in their luggage and open your drawers and put their stuff in there and they're not leaving. That's a completely different dynamic to deal with. None of us asked for this. None of us wished this, but this is the most divinely inspired thing that could have happened to any congregation or church. And it's hard to see that sometimes when you feel a sense of loss. So here we are with our worship music, we're hugging each other, and it's all spirit-filled and heartfelt, and we're asking people to do something that they're not used to. There were some people who thought that Marlon was doing too much racial stuff, But the difference became, you can now no longer say that you don't know people who have been impacted by this.
In light of the beginnings, 1921 to 2021, the arc of that story that goes from our founder and his role in the race riot all the way to this congregation that is deeply committed and has been working for decades for the unity and equality of all people here in the community. And so moving into downtown allows us to be in what we might call culturally neutral space. In downtown, that's everybody's Tulsa.
Where's the entrance? The entrance will be right here. We'll come right in here. It's gonna be beautiful. This whole side is gonna be gorgeous. And then you have the main sanctuary right here, facing Greenwood. We'll have the arch window. We'll have all that stuff facing Greenwood right here.
So the crowd will be looking that way.
Looking right at Greenwood, which is, that was the segregated.
And that was the Black Wall Street.
That's right, Black Wall Street.
And so we really see this role as being border walkers between cultures and between theologies and religious expressions as something that gives us a role in society that can help us to help lead the community and the country towards its promise.
I think that churches like Mayflower and All Souls will be the premier mega churches in the next 10 years. I think people are going to come from everywhere saying, I relate to this because there's no judgment, there's no dogma in this place. I can be me. I can be proud of being me. I can come here unapologetically. If it was LA or Frisco or even New York, everybody expects it. Nobody expects it. What good thing can come out of Oklahoma since Oral?
We're making a little tiny difference, but I have this new theory about God, that God doesn't do anything in my theology, but without God, nothing gets done. So every single action changes something, which changes something else, which changes something else, which changes everything. And you can depend on that, and that's what faith's all about.
Welcome to the All Souls Group. You can snap your fingers if you want to.
Well, hello and welcome back. I paused the film because I do want to run the credits, but I wanted to, since we do have Martin, I did want to spend some time with him, so that we can do some question and answer with him. So we will do the Q&A and then get back to the credits. So, welcome. I appreciate you being here. And I think if people have questions, please go ahead and throw those in the comments. If you're on social media, we do have someone who's monitoring that will feed us those. So please do that as well. Great film. And I think from the secular community, which clearly, looks at, I think, many of the things that the film dealt with, and looks at the messages that religion is especially currently sending out within our society. Our students, and I think many of our people, are often called heretics in that, and somewhat embrace that a little bit. And so I would love to know how much, your thoughts about heretic in the sense of this film and your feelings about that.
Of course, thanks for having me, and I appreciate you all watching the film and having a chance to talk about it. I'm interested to hear what kinds of questions are generated tonight from watching the film from this particular community. As far as heretics go, as you know probably very well, the root of the word means to choose. So this is about people who choose how to orient themselves around values and morals and ethics and all of that kind of stuff. And so in our congregation, we have people of all different, who come from lots of different backgrounds, Islamic backgrounds, Jewish backgrounds, to various Christian backgrounds, no faith. We have a humanist service that's completely devoid of anything that is traditionally religious every Sunday at All Souls. And so we have people coming from lots of different backgrounds who are choosing to be together and also choosing to follow a path that allows them the freedom to follow their conscience and what their true minds, values, and experience lead them to believe and to be in the world.
No, great, and I appreciate that. I know we had the pleasure of talking a little bit earlier, and so I just touching base before this. And I think one of the things that struck me, I think our community very much is deeds before dogma, which we heard a little bit of that reminiscent in the documentary, and very much beyond belief, and what are you doing, and those things. And for your church, I think the slogan is love beyond belief, and I'd love for you just explain a little bit about that.
Oh yeah, that's great. So the idea is that love is ultimately more important than belief. So that we could believe lots of different things, and we could certainly argue over what you think about afterlife, what I think about afterlife, the origins of our species, or whatever else. A lot of things that we don't know, none of us can prove. We could argue about that. But if I ask you, what is it that you love? What is it that you care most about? Probably we're going to make a connection, because you probably care about family and the environment, and who knows, a lot of other things that I care about too. So when we shift the conversation around love, and if we imagine that people's value structures, ultimately, if the ultimate goal is love more than belief, and of course, love and justice is love in action, then we are, focusing our religion in the right way. And so again, for us, people have lots of different beliefs within our congregation, and certainly within our country. But what's more important is asking that question: what do you love? What do you care about most? And on that level, I've been able to connect with people across every kind of religious difference that I've ever encountered.
Yeah, I can totally see how those commonalities of whether it's religious belief and which religion you live in, or just the secular belief of, we believe in good, and part of our job is to end suffering in the world and make the world a better place for ourselves and for others. I think that commonality stands through, and it's really the bridge that sort of brings this all together. Yeah, and I think clearly our community, and the documentary also reflects it as well, is the United States is a secular nation, was started as a secular nation. The founding leaders very much believed in that and put that into documents and treaties and those sorts of things all along the line. It wasn't until much later that we saw that sort of shift and change. And so, and really the 80s is when we saw the politicalization of religion, especially within our society and those sorts of things. So I think, what do you speaking to religious people, I think you have a different voice that the people are going to listen to. With the rise of Christian nationalism that we've seen, the polarization under the Trump administration, what's the bridge to religious people to get them to see, I think, the message that you're trying to share?
Yeah, again, I mean, that's the $1 million question right now, isn't it? All across the country, trying to figure that one out. And I'm in the Washington Post today because I'm in a dispute with the governor of Oklahoma, because the governor of Oklahoma called yesterday for a day of prayer and fasting across Oklahoma to try to help, quell COVID-19. And of course, the media jumped on that and came to me and said, what do you think about prayer and fasting as a response when we've been pushing him to create a mask mandate and things like that? Follow the scientists, follow what the doctors are saying. So I said, hey, I'm all for prayer. Prayer's fine for me. In fact, we've been praying, most of us in the religious community, for 8 months. Nothing's new today on Thursday, because the governor asked us to pray. I said, and there are a lot of people, 25% of Oklahoma are food insecure. They're fasting. They don't want to fast. They're not fasting by choice. They don't have enough food. So I think it's a little tone deaf. And so again, I think to answer your question that you're asking is, I often find myself on the divide with folks across the political spectrum, and I don't hide my opinion. But I don't think we're supposed to hide, our opinions and our positions. At the same time, if I happen to be sitting with, I don't know our current governor, but I know some of the former governors, I know mayors, in Tulsa. When I meet them and we're talking about our families and we're at a dinner or we're at an event, I always find ways to connect with them. And, same thing with the police. I'm on the front lines a lot of times around police protests, and particularly around racial violence and justice in this community. At the same time, I've developed a lot of really strong relationships with police officers one-on-one in this community.
Yeah. And a lot of with the Secular Student Alliance, we really do a strong work with students mostly in colleges and universities across the country. And I think our students are very active in interfaith work. And really in a variety of different programs and really doing that. And so again, it's you have the right for your religion, and it's the freedom of and from religion. So let's all be a part of this and all appreciate each other. And if you want to believe religion, great, not a problem. I'm going to choose not to. That's also fine. But how are we going to do better in the world and those sorts of things, which I think is a good part of what you addressed. I think in our current society. And I was like, generalization, conservative Christians have really used the Bible to continue to justify discrimination of LGBT people, misogyny against women, racial inequality, anti-immigration, denial of climate change, and doing anything effective for the climate. And the documentary alluded to young people leaving religion. And I think there's a strong correlation between that and young people leaving, which many in our community would be completely fine with. Right. What do you say to young people who are hearing these messages but wanting to be, whether they're religious or not, wanting to be active, and then what do they do?
There are a couple of things that come to mind as you ask that question. Number one, I'm thrilled about the interfaith work that your community does, because really that breaks down so many barriers. In our church at 11:30 on Sunday morning, pre-COVID, obviously there's some things that are changing now, but at 11:30 we had both our humanist service in our fellowship hall, and in our sanctuary we have our most God-based theistic service. It's the one that you saw mostly pictured on the film, which is interracial and it's got more Bible than anything else we do. Both of those are happening at the same time. And then those communities spill out and have their refreshments and coffee hour and other things together. And then during the week, they're volunteering in the schools and the food pantries and the homeless shelters, all doing all that stuff together. And so what happens is, because we're one community, the folks have gotten to know each other. And a lot of the humanists who previously would have thought, anyone who believes in God, it's just a crutch. They're just weak. That's just, they're deluded. They're stupid even sometimes. They've gotten to know the folks and realized, wow, that's not true. My stereotype isn't true, and vice versa. So we have a lot of folks who are like, I feel so bad for people who don't have a relationship with God, or I feel so, they're so empty, or they think they're unethical. Well, all of a sudden now they're in relationship with all these folks, and they realize, wow, these are great people. They love their kids. They're ethical. In fact, many secular and humanist folks they're not expecting Jesus or any God to come down as a superhero and fix everything. So they tend to be, in my experience, some of the most ethical and engaged folks working for social justice and change. So I love that when folks mix together beyond and that are not afraid of each other's belief or disbelief. Yeah. Wow, great things I think happen, and I think it's just really important.
Okay, we got a couple of questions, and one was, do you have any comments on the recent Methodist denomination split over LGBT issues? And then sort of what percentage split off do you think there might be on one side or the other of that change?
So I don't know a lot. I haven't read a lot of the details in terms of the percentages. So I'm not sure what's happening with that. I'm in relationship with ministers from churches on both sides of that divide here in Tulsa. We have folks who are two of the 5 largest Methodist churches in the country are in Tulsa downtown, right next door to each other practically. These two that are taking different sides on this divide. So I'm very aware of it, and it breaks my heart to see it happening. But I'm really proud of the folks who are LGBT friendly, who recognize the dignity of all people, and have taken that stand at the risk of splitting this very old denomination. And I think that, that's what it takes. It takes that kind of, it took that around racial differences in the past. And this is what's happening right now around sexuality and gender identity and things like that.
No, definitely. And I grew up Catholic, strong Catholic background in my family. And sort of, I think in my process towards deconversion was going to Episcopal Church, All Saints in Pasadena, which is, about living out your social activism all the time. And so that's one of the things that I, as a younger person, I loved about the church and what it did. And so, there I was like, I sort of ignored the God stuff and reveled in the community and in the social justice aspect. And I think I think with the Anglican communion, you see the American church and the rest of the Anglican communion somewhat at odds, and I think continued talks of a split. You see that in the Methodist, and I think the UU, which is your background, is really, I think, done and I think some of what you've shared, a good example of we can embrace all these different things, including humanism and secularism, and bring that together. I think what are some of the successes or words of wisdom or like easy things to do to sort of help bridge that process?
I'll tell you, one of the things I say a lot to Christian colleagues or evangelicals who come to talk to me, and they're trying to say, they can't quite make a connection to what we're doing and what we're about. And I'll say to them, imagine for a second that Jesus were to come back tomorrow and surround himself with, his advisors, whoever they would be today, in his version of the Oval Office or whatever. He brings them around, and what would be his first question to those advisors? Would his first question be, what are the numbers? How are we doing? How many souls have we saved? Or would his question be, how much closer are we to building the kingdom of heaven here on earth? And I said, how you answer that question, you're in your denomination, typically, if I'm talking to a Baptist evangelical, is what are the numbers? Jesus would come back. His most important thing is how we doing saving souls. I said, in my community, we read the same Bible you read, and we come out saying his first question would be, how much closer are we to creating the kingdom of heaven on earth? That's what was important to him. That's what mattered. And so I always say, we're reading the same book. We just look at it very differently. And I said, if you want to look in terms of how many passages talk about the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of God on earth, you're going to find a lot more than you're going to find about it says anything about saving souls in the Bible. So I said, I think I have a pretty good case. And I said, we can agree to disagree. And that's, that's been a bridge builder for me with a lot of Bible-based thinkers. And that idea of building, the commonwealth, the kinship of humanity is something that, and really with all creatures that, we've even broadened that out, even with our humanist expression, we realize that that's been too human centered and humans have been destroying the earth, scientists, secularists, we've been destroying the earth just as bad as any religious people. And so really looking at, we need to think beyond just humanism as humans as the highest form of life and recognize our interconnectedness with all life.
Definitely. And I think that's, I think as a secular community, I think we are, going much more down in that messaging, that path, and sort of living that out in our daily lives as well. And I think, all of us are on a journey. And so as we learn more and as we have more knowledge and more evidence, and the internet completely helps with that, and the availability of that knowledge, I think hopefully we can get closer together on some things. And I think the Bible says there's a lot in the Bible, and there's a lot of very negative things in the Bible, which our community likes to point out. But I think if you look at what Jesus, some of his messages was helping the poor, ending suffering, welcoming the stranger, and Jesus did a lot of hanging out with a lot of outcasts and not the popular people. And those I think are messages that we can all get behind. And again, I think rather than, we always say, thanks for your thoughts and prayers, it's not doing a lot. What are you doing out there? And you seem to be, I think, a very much of a denomination and a mindset of we really need to get out there and change our communities for the better.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in a way, we're really a community for people. We recognize that even if someone's secular or whatever they believe or don't believe, or they're confused or they're mixing, they're like, I like some Buddhism, I like a little bit of this, but they're looking for a community, and a community that cares about change. And so, and they're dealing with marriage breakups, and they're dealing with, having children and raising children in this world that tries to dehumanize us through technology and capitalism and so many other things, colonialism. So they want to decolonize their minds and do all that kind of stuff. But where do you do that if you don't have a community that has those core values? So I know you're creating that with the secular organization that you have, and we're trying to create rituals and routines and ways to educate our kids. I mean, they get algebra at school, but who teaches them how to forgive, how to get right with themselves when they've made a mistake and hurt somebody, and all those kinds of things. So we're trying to create a community where folks feel welcome. They don't feel like they're being pushed to proselytize by any means, or pushed to believe something that they don't believe. But we still have all the same human problems and all the life ups and downs, and to have a community, especially a community with which, I'll tell you, on after 9/11, a lot of folks, September 11, 2001, a lot of folks, secular folks who I'm in relationship with around the country, New York, other places, they were looking for places to give. And there was a tsunami. I don't know if I know how old the folks are who are watching all this, but big tsunami, all this, crisis. They're looking for ways to give and give back and get involved. But they were seeing that a lot of the respondents were religious organizations. They were trying to figure out where do I plug in? And so they were really, they recognized how important it was to have a community of values and openness and inclusion that's socially justice oriented. And so I think we're one example of that comes out of the religious world.
No, yeah, and I think in talking with our students, most of our students come from religious households, and so usually in college, it's a time when you start looking at your background and what you were taught and those things. That's when you start to judge that for yourself and to examine that for yourself. And so, over 80% of our students come from religious families, and oftentimes they're not supportive of the non-religion. And we just had a student recently in Northern Kentucky who did one post on his social media about being an atheist, and his parents called him up and they, they wanted him to renounce it. He's like, I don't believe in God. I was being very sincere and honest about that. And they immediately withdrew all financial aid from him. So he's like, I've got to find a second job now so that I can, because I'm finished in school, so my community, my family, my community back home, they're not supportive. I've got to move on. So we deal with that all the time. You were mentioning the number, how are we doing with numbers?
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that we watch very carefully is it wasn't that long ago, 1 in 5 of the U.S. was non-religious. Now the general population 1 in 4. For college age students, it was 1 in 3. And there's just a new study coming out that 47% of students now are non-religious. And so we're very much looking at this sort of being the tipping point where the U.S. in this generation could turn majority non-religion rather than religious.
Right.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I just, one of the things that I find really interesting, because I have a very similar demographic, people coming out of other faith traditions that they're looking for something. Usually when they have kids, that's often when people will show up. They're like, hey, we got kids. We probably should give them some education around this stuff. Hey, I heard there's this, Unitarian church that we can do that. And they come check us out. And if they like us, they stay. But my point is that what I find is that people who've come out of a particular tradition have usually deconstructed that tradition. They've deconstructed the ideas of God that they heard about. They've deconstructed the Bible, and they know exactly what they do not believe.
Yeah.
And then what I do, here at All Souls is we have classes and we get people on a path of reconstructing. So, okay, you threw that out. Then what do you believe? I mean, what do you think about God? What do you think about prayer? All these, things that about humanity and about afterlife, about death, and sort of so that they begin to have a more positive orientation, and they can say what they actually do believe and value, rather than just orient that whole part of their being and their psyche and everything else around a negative, which I do think that can become a little bit corrosive over time. To getting in fights with other people, trying to tell people why their religion doesn't, is stupid, or, all the kinds of things that many of us do who are frustrated with fundamentalism. At the same time, once we start being creative about our own views, values, and beliefs, then and can articulate them, I think we become a lot more interesting. I mean, rhetorically and just in conversation, we become more interesting that way. So I really encourage that, especially for secular minded folks, that the deconstruction, that's important, but that's the first step.
Yeah. And it sounds like from your perspective, wherever, as people are taking that journey within your church, wherever they come out, you're okay with whatever their belief is. It's about deconstructing that and finding that path, and wherever you come out, you're fine.
Right. It's totally based in freedom, but there's this idea that to be a free thinker absolutely alone is somewhat irresponsible. I mean, ethics is you have in relationship with other people. Mm-hmm. So you want to have a community, whether it's the Secular Student Alliance or whatever, but where you can bounce your ideas off of, because I could. As I happen to be, a white male with higher education, I'm straight, I'm cisgendered, I can name all the things who I am. Well, the thing is, I might develop beliefs about the world, about myself, about others, that a woman, any woman could come to me and go, as a woman coming from my gender identity, I'm not, you have to understand the impact on me of what you're saying or what your belief is, or if African-American, or I'm, whatever a person's experience that's different from mine. So to do this in community, the reconstruction and the if you're going to be free about developing, hey, I'm following my conscience. Well, what was his name? The Unabomber. Some of you may have heard of the Unabomber, right? He was brilliant, Harvard educated. He had a manifesto. This is a guy who went out and bombed a bunch of people, thinking he was going to save America or whatever. And the thing was, he had a manifesto that all made logical sense in his mind, in his thinking. It was an airtight philosophy, but he was living in a cabin all by himself, and he created this thing which led him to go start bombing judges and things like that. Well, that's the point. I mean, that's an extreme example, but to be a free thinker around religions, ethics, and morals, it's important to be in community with others who can tell you that, hey, your thinking might need a little refinement here because of its impact on me.
Well, and I think we're better free thinkers, and we're better humans when we are in community and conversation and understand our world and the way it impacts others and the way others impact us. Because we're on this planet together, we have to work with other people.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we have. There was another question. This one's a rather off topic. We're just talking about.
All right.
So it says, I was struck by the statement in the documentary that you can't be a Democrat and a Christian. And it says, how do we fix that?
Yeah, I mean, please don't take that completely out of context. He was saying that kind of in a very generalized way, right? That was the sociologist, right, who was saying that.
But there is in our current framework, there's some validity.
Right. But there's some truth to that. There's enough truth to that it makes sense. We all understand what he means. So how do we fix? I mean, I'll tell you, it's frustrating. Even in my congregation, historically, and we have Republicans in my congregation, but historically we had more. But since the 80s, when this happened, where you saw this kind of divide, and the religious right and the political right just came together in the way that they did. It's really sad because a lot of people who were Republican thinkers back in the old Republican Party, they came to All Souls because they didn't believe that Jesus Christ was the Lord and Savior. They didn't believe that the Bible was, the one and only manifesto of how you're supposed to live your life. They were free thinkers and they wanted to be in community, just like I've been talking about. But what's happened is that the alliances have become so politicized that it becomes less, Republicans can feel pushed out of our community because of stands that we take around justice issues. Quite frankly, I mean, a lot of LGBT issues, immigration issues, and other kinds of things. So I don't take partisan political stands, but I take stands on issues, and those have become so partisan, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I think your question was, what do we do about it? I think there's a big change happening right now in the political parties. I'm not sure what the political parties are going to look like in 8 years, to be honest with you. I mean, you've got the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, you got the moderate wing, you got all these moderate Republicans making their way over to the moderate wing of the Democratic Party, and you've got the Trumpers who are, conspiracy theories, all this stuff mixed in with religious ideology and fundamentalism. So I don't know what these, if you think of those four broad camps, how do they break out into two parties or multiple parties? I think there's something changing in our politics, and I'm not sure, is the Democratic Party going to go all progressive? Then if that happens, what happens to the moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans, especially if the Republican Party goes all, in on the Trump direction? So now you've got this whole middle that, where do they fit? And so it's going to be interesting how this all, and I think there will be implications within the church. And I'll just say this last, and this one I think maybe there's a lot of agreement about, is that I think that the evangelical Christian community has a lot of egg on its face and a lot of explaining to do after the last 4 years. If it didn't before, it certainly has now.
It does now, yeah. And just that, and not to go down the rabbit hole, but just the hypocrisy of it all. I think that's very obvious to a majority of the United States. It'll be interesting to see what happens politically and those are things. I think the real value, and I think that the documentary highlights this, and it's really looking at, I think, what a lot of secular people wish, and I say this kindly, wish religious people were more like, and doing good and focusing on your deeds and how you're bettering the world. So I hope that the secular community can watch this and go, okay, there are good religious people out there. And there are, because I think we all need our allies. We all need to be working with each other. And for right now, there is a portion which is, I think, working against what we stand for democracy in the United States, and whether you are secular and believe in doing good, or you're religious and believe in doing good, are also working against that. So,
Right.
So I think go ahead.
No, I just think that what you're pointing at is really important, and I think I can speak to this. It's funny, in this forum, I'm like the most religious person, and in most forums, I'm like the least religious person, right? That I get it, but there's two kinds of sort of secular and humanistic sort of approaches that I see, broad brush, of course. And one is really anti-religion, that paints religion with a broad brush and doesn't see any of the subtleties. It's just religion's all bad, religion's all oppressive. There's nothing good in religion. And I just think that that's a little bit sort of anti-intellectual in a way. It's a little uninformed. And so, what I love and what I'm around a lot in my community is people who are secular to the core in terms of their religious values, beliefs, how they understand the earth and everything else. But they're not anti, they understand that within religion, there's an incredible spectrum, even within Christianity, even within the Episcopal Church or the Methodist Church or the Presbyterian. So there's a lot of variation. And I think leaning into that complexity can allow us to find places of respect for folks who are religious, and not just, because I used to do the same thing. I used to do it to anyone who was Christian. I had this stereotype of what a Christian was, and I was, I was kind of ignorant. I got called out on it when I first came into seminary and that world.
Yeah. And I think I agree with what you said. I also think there's a good percentage of the secular community and the atheist, agnostic, humanist community who there has been some genuine, real pain from religion and religious communities. Right. And I think so I think, in what you said, I also think there's the acknowledgement there are some people who are tremendously hurt by religion, and that is part of their rejection. And right. It's a valid feeling and a valid response, which I think you would completely agree with. So
I agree with you completely. But I think we'd also agree that ultimately, to carry that, that hurt and that orientation and let that shape a person, so that pain becomes such a factor that we can't see the complexity and everything. I mean, I guess I'm suggesting seeing the complexity because I think it's healing for some of that pain, to realize, because if you think the whole world's against you, in essence, you can kind of look at the mirror image of this Trump conspiracy, 76% of the Republican Party who believe all this conspiracy stuff right now, that these are folks who they feel embattled. They think the world's against them. They think, all this awful stuff's happening. If they could just see a little bit more complexity, they'd be less frightened of Biden and Harris and, all these folks. So, and people like me who, I'm politically progressive. So, but they're scared of me. And I think that there's a way in which, because, when we're based in the fear and the pain and the trauma that we've been through, which is all real and needs to be tended to and cared for, I do think that healing that can help us, and seeing complexity is one of the signs of a healthy person, as far as that goes.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you, and I hope that it's documenters like this and people like your church, people like you and your church, who can help share those stories where there's commonality in the good we want to do in the world. There's commonality in moving forward with our society and those are things, and that we're allies in this, and that working together we actually do more. You can still have your beliefs. You can still. We, in the U.S., we still have the freedom of and from religion, so that's still in essence. But I do think, as we move forward, we're better as allies in being able to do that, and working against the stuff that we commonly don't believe in, and hopefully being able to progress that a little bit more.
Right.
So there were, and part of the comments we were getting was lots of great. Thank you very much. This is a great film. Really love the messaging in it. So. I think I'm glad we were able to do this. I thank you for being here on a Friday night, and taking part in this as well. Thank you very much.
Hey, I appreciate folks tuning in, and you giving me an opportunity to talk to everybody. I hope I get to meet some folks at some point. Please and reach out on Facebook or Instagram or any of the other things. I'd love to to connect and answer more questions if I can in any of those ways. Just look me up under my name. You can find me in a lot of different forums, and yeah.
No, that's great. Thank you very much for being here. I'm going to go ahead. I believe in doing the credits. So, and there are some little fun clips in the credit.
Right.
So I'm going to go ahead and continue the credits so that people can watch those, because I want to pay homage to the people who did the hard work. But thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks. It's an honor. Take care,
Okay.
everybody.